call Gopal and make sure that the sound's working. Can you put it on? Hare Krishna. Okay. Narayanam namaskritya naramam chaivam narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. And by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering a service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. In loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. That verse is Nasta prayashta bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. So that's what we should do before reciting. It's nice. Tad bhavan dayamanayam. Tad bhavan dayamanayam. Sapatninam samriddhibihi prajavatinam badram te maya nyuktam anugraham tadbhavan dayamanayam sapatninam samriddhibihi prajavatinam badram te maya yuktam anugraha. Please chant. Tat, therefore, Bhavan, your good self, Dahyamanayam, being distressed, Sapatninam, of the co-wives, Samriddhi, by the prosperity, Prajavatinam, of those who have children, Bhadram, all prosperity, Te, unto you, Mai, unto me, Ayunktam, do unto me in all respects, Anugraham, favor. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Therefore you should be kind towards me by showing me complete mercy. I desire to have sons and am much distressed by seeing the opulence of my co-wives. By performing this act, you will become happy. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, sexual intercourse for begetting children is accepted as righteous. A person sexually inclined for simple sense gratification, however, is unrighteous. In deity's appeal to her husband for sex, it was not exactly that she was afflicted by sex desires, but she desired sons. Since she had no sons, she felt poorer than her co-wives. Therefore, Kasyapa was supposed to satisfy his bona fide wife. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Katamayam Daranti Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha E Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Turbhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Kroti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Giram Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Dina Taranam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. Therefore, you should be kind towards me by showing me complete mercy. I desire to have sons and am very much distressed by seeing the opulence of my co-wives. By performing this act, you will become happy. Hare Krishna, everybody. We're in the 14th chapter of the 3rd canto, and we've just heard about the appearance of Vraha and how he did a few things, and one was killing Hiranyaksha. And so now we're in chapter 14. This is now describing what were the circumstances that such a demon like Hiranyaksha was born. And so now the scene is being set. You have Kasyapa Muni, the son of Marichi, who was offered 9 daughters of Daksha, I think. I can't remember the exact number, but Daksha had a bunch of different daughters, and he offered them to different powerful sages and different people for the purpose of increasing the population. Daksha is known as one of the progenitors, and so after having sets of so many sons that ended up being preached to very strongly and becoming celibate monks, he gave up on having sons, and then the idea was to have daughters. So some of his daughters became the wives of Kasyapa Muni, and so when I was first reading this, it seemed like you know what to do? Just turn up the volume knob or the slider up. Either way. That's the bottom. You go to the first channel and it's like the bottom one. You can make it go to like 9 or 10. When I'm talking, the 2 or 3 lights should show up. And when I'm not talking, it should be no lights. Okay, so when I was first reading this, sorry for the technical disturbance. When I was first reading this, it was seeming like DT was being a little duplicitous, and the saying from, gosh, I'm getting disturbed by so many things. That DT was being duplicitous in the shloka from Chanakya Pandit came to mind, that never trust a woman or a politician. And because in the previous verse, if we remember from yesterday, that she was saying, oh, Cupid's disturbing me so much like an elephant, tearing down a banana tree, and, saying like that. But then she's saying, and then right after that, actually, like Prabhupada says in the purport, it's not exactly that she was afflicted by sex desire, but that she desired sons. So you can, but actually, and then reading in the later chapters, even in the Bhagavatam, it's directly saying she also was afflicted. So it was a little bit of both. And this leads to kind of the first point I wanted to talk about, is that she's seeing her other co-wives, that they have something that she doesn't have, and essentially she's envious. She wants to have it, and this is, if we all remember the drama, right? Envy was like one of the most powerful assistants or servants of sin. When sin personified was sitting there, she was the consort of Kali, sitting there and asking how everyone was going to help her bring in, make Kali Yuga strong. And so, we see this every day. There's a phrase that they call keeping up with the Joneses, right? It's like in a sitcom, like there's like the fence between the two neighbors. The one guy like looks over, like he sees like the guy like with the nice lawnmower, and he like looks at his and he's got the crappy one. Okay, so he's got to go out and buy a better one. He's got to buy the one that you sit in, and then and then the next day he's looking over. Oh, his neighbor's got a big flat screen TV, bigger than his, so he can't have that. And there's always this, sense of like you have to do better, and in Kali Yuga and in general in the material world, actually there's no happiness, but the things that people think are happiness, like Maharaj was talking yesterday about hiding an unnatural happiness. Like there's no actual material happiness. It's all just distress. But the things that we like, when we think about something, when we're planning something, that's when we think we're happy. Like if you're planning to go on a vacation, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like drink pina colada and be on the beach, and it's gonna be so nice. And just imagining that's kind of like the most in touch with actual happiness that we really get. And then the second one is noticing that you're doing better than someone else in any way. Then that makes us, okay, yeah, at least I'm like better than them. I'm lording it over them. That's the actual happiness. So this is just envy. The material world is a place full of envy, and the spiritual world is the opposite. The spiritual world is no envy. Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. The Bhagavatam was spoken for the purpose of the satams, the devotees who are nirmatsaranam. They don't have any envy. The devotees are para dukkha dukhi. Para means others, dukkha means distress, dukhi means their distress. So when there's a devotee, he feels the other's distress as his own distress. Whereas most people, like in Amara Jivana, there's a line that Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, para suke dukhi. So the other's happiness, for most people, if you're in the material world with a material mentality, you see someone that's like actually happy, then that makes you distressed. So, the happiness of others makes me sad, makes me dukhi. And so this is the difference. And even Krishna says, idam tute guhyatamam, I'm going to give you this guhyatamam, this secret, the great secret, because pravakshame anasuyave. I'm going to tell you because you're anasuya. You're not envious of me. In the material world, everyone is directly or indirectly envious of Krishna being the enjoyer. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. He has all facilities to be able to enjoy, and everyone wants to try to copy that and be that. And so that's why they're in the material world, and it's just proof that they can't because they're not able to. And so we have to really curb this envious propensity. Envy, if we analyze it a little bit, it's the inability to tolerate someone else's superiority, or being unhappy to see others happy, like that para suke duki. So we have to, in fact, in the spiritual world, there is hierarchy. It's not that everyone is the same. There's a spiritual variegation, and so some are lower, some are higher. But seeing someone else's superiority is always in relation to service to Krishna, and then it's actually, it becomes less envy. And I've heard some devotees, I don't know what the Sanskrit terminology would be, but they kind of make a dichotomy between envy and jealousy. Like there's like improper envy, and then there's like jealousy, which is okay because and whatever word you use, the difference is that it helps you advance in your service and makes you appreciate Krishna and that devotee more. Like they see some devotee that's pleasing Krishna more, and they're like, wow, I didn't know that you could do that to please Krishna. That's amazing that the devotee is doing it. Now I want to try harder and do better than that. And in that way, there's competition, but it's ecstatic competition. Whereas envy is like, wow, I see you're doing this thing, and I just want you to die and not do it, so I can look better. I don't want to actually improve. I just don't want you to do good. That's what envy is. So that's part of the whole material world. Is everyone has this against each other to some extent, and so there's just so much competition. It comes in so many different forms, and is very ugly. And so we see here that Diti, one of the circumstances, she had this very sinful son, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, and it's coming from this place of envy of her co-wives to the point where she can't control herself, and she just has to take advantage of her husband. And her husband tries to fight it off and say, oh, my dear wife, it's not the time. There's, it's the wrong time of the evening, and there's these ghosts. Just wait till it's over, and then I will certainly fulfill your desire. But she couldn't even wait. I don't know how long she has to wait, an hour or two, or maybe to the next day. But basically by force, then she tries to get impregnated by Kasyapa, and they have to take the terrible results. So that brings to the next part that I wanted to talk about, was the Garbhadan Samskara. So Prabhupada's mentioning here, in Bhagavad Gita, sexual intercourse for begetting children is accepted as righteous. In 7:11, Krishna says, Dharma virudo, so that which is not against Dharma, kamosmi bharatarshava, that's what I am for all people. So kamosmi means sex life. So Krishna is personally sex life that's not contrary to the principles of Dharma. And I remember when the only thing I remember from when I was reading Bhagavad Gita the first time was that there is illicit sex and there's licit sex. And I was, that's what everyone's focused on in the material world is sex. And so it was kind of oh wait, what? There's actually illicit sex? I never really thought about it like that. And so I was trying to figure out, and the mind's always trying to figure out a way, okay, so how can you game the system? All right, so but we can still have it a lot, right? And it ended up coming as no, it's just you just have it to have children, like Prabhupada says here. Sexual intercourse for begetting children is accepted as righteous. So And a few stories came to mind. One is Brahmananda was talking with Prabhupada. So illicit sex means it's only for having children. Prabhupada said, yes. And he's like, so then, what's the point? That means you're only having a couple times. And Prabhupada's like, yes, good boy, you've understood. And like another one, like Gaur Govinda Maharaj, before he became a sannyasi, he was actually married. And he told his disciples, he said, every time I laid with my wife, I produce one child. The number of children I have is the number of times I've been with my wife. And so yeah, that makes a point that in Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada said, all my women disciples should be married, and all my men disciples should be brahmacharis. So actually, if we're following Dharma, every devotee, every disciple is actually a brahmachari. Prabhupada even says, he coined the term grahasta brahmachari, if they're properly following Dharma, properly performing garbhadam samskar every time that they're performing the sexual act, then they're non-different from a brahmachari. Brahmachari just means acting in accords with Brahman or Krishna's will. And so if they're following this proper duty, then they're not going to get degraded. Actually, sex life can be one of the most degrading things for the consciousness. If you're trying to elevate your consciousness, I'm not my body, I'm a servant of Krishna, I'm not the enjoyer, I'm not the doer. Sex life is one of those things that it completely makes the mind able to think, oh, I am the enjoyer, I am the doer. Look at this, look what I'm the creator. Look, I made someone. To them I'm like God, to the kids, or I am my body because that felt really good. So like that, it's completely contrary to spiritual realization. So then, therefore, there's the garbhadam samskar, which is the start of auspicious civilization. In human civilization, there's 10 different major samskaras, which are to be performed throughout the life, from garbhadam samskar all the way to the last rites after the soul has left the body. And all of these are for the purpose of maintaining spiritual potency throughout the whole life, for the point of essentially helping the civilization remain spiritual, and for helping the soul go back to Godhead and keep that connection with Krishna. I don't know if I can, off the top of my head, name all 10 in a row, but maybe let's try to get as many as possible. So garbhadam samskar and the last rites, that's 2. Can anyone do any more? Hair cutting ceremony? First grain ceremony. Yeah, marriage, that's a ceremony.
You said that, right?
Yeah, so that's 5 out of 10. That's a different one. That's also necessary, and definitely a samskara. That's why we have this whole big. All the samskaras should be performed with someone making a sacrifice, and all the devotees coming, doing kirtan and all this. That's generally how it should be. Yeah. So like that, there's so many, and it's very important. We see in all throughout the Bhagavatam, anyone who's becoming a mother or a father in the Bhagavatam, they do something to make sure the child is powerful. They do something. Like you hear about Krishna's parents before in their previous life, how they did austerities for 1,000 years of the demigods on some mountain. And we also hear this in our contemporary life. I've heard one Dinabandhu Prabhu in Vrindavan, he gives us parikrams and talks about everything in Vrindavan, shows us around. And so in Uddhavakund, which is a place near Govardhan, there's one Uddhavakund Baba who's lived there his entire life almost. And Dinabandhu talks about his parents. They did 1,000 Govardhan parikrams before having their son. And what happened when they had their son? Their son became a wonderful devotee, of Govardhan, and he literally lives there the whole time. And even today, you can go there and he can read your palm, and he can, tell you different things. You have to probably speak Hindi because I don't think he speaks English, but that's there. And for for devotees, Prabhupada gave there's many details in the Vedas about how what the Garbhodam Samskar is, but specifically Prabhupada, and we'll go into a little bit of those details as I've heard. Prabhupada was saying basically you just chant 50 rounds and then have the child, and that extra chanting that you're doing, that'll spiritualize the child. And I've heard from parents, so some of their kids have been, quote unquote 50 rounders, some have it, and they totally notice the difference that when your consciousness hasn't been surcharged by extra spiritual activity, then the type of souls that come through are more materialistic. And so Garbhodam Samskar the whole point is to bring forth someone spiritual that can actually help with the upliftment of the material world. And I think the greatest example is Bhaktivinoda Thakur. His son was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And so all the spiritual practices Bhaktivinoda Thakur did, he's famous for that. And before he was having his child, he was praying to Krishna saying, I'm trying my best to do this preaching, but now I need someone from your own personal retinue to come really help me because I don't think I can succeed. And so Krishna reciprocated with his pure devotee's desire, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is born. So it's funny. Most of what I know about the Garbhodam Samskar is from some lecture that Ayendra Prabhu was giving. So it is a little awkward as a brahmachari talking about the Garbhodam Samskar from another brahmachari, or Ayendra said he was a Brahma Griha Vanayasi when they're asking him what was his ashram. But basically there's you have to, what Prabhupada said, 50 rounds, and then there's a whole science on what kind of children you want to have. And so when the woman is right after her time of the month, if you have a child right then, it's going to produce a more materialistic child. But then if you wait, every odd day after that period will produce a female child, and every even day will produce a male child. And so therefore, if you wait the longest time until the next time of the month, that child will be the most peaceful and saintly and able to, exhibit more sattva gun qualities and devotee qualities. And there's actually, I found there was a whole book written by Bharat Chandra, who's a great devotee in India, and he's trying to write a book on all these different things, on all the 64 arts. And one of the books he wrote was Nimitta Jnana, which I used to have it, but somehow lost it. It's a really great book talking about one of the 64 arts of the science of seeing things, how to predict things based on what you observe. And then there's another one he wrote about Garbhodam Samskar, and I just found it. It's 300 pages, extremely detailed information. But the point is that the Garbhodam Samskar it's a sacrifice. It's a samskar. It's not if just out of most people when they're born, Arjuna's concern in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, or the first chapter, is that if we go through with this war and all these men die, then these are the strong men upholding Dharma. They're just going to be weak men that are just going to take advantage of the women and either rape or take advantage of them, and there'll be so many unwanted children born that it's going to increase the bad population of the earth. So the point of the Garbhodam Samskar is to increase the good population of the earth, increase the higher consciousness souls, and so that everyone can be uplifted. And as we see, Now DT is not following that, and what happens? They get a terrible result. And so I think that's about all that's coming to my mind right now about Garbhadam Samskar, about this verse. It's like a short verse and short purport. Oh, no, there was one more thing I wanted to read. There was a letter to Kirti Raj that Prabhupada wrote. It's about illicit sex. And I think I just want to read it verbatim because it's very nice, very specific and like scientific. Prabhupada gets into the details about how the psychology and everything of illicit sex can work and how we can overcome it. So, regarding your question about thinking about sex, so Kirtiraj must have asked Prabhupada, like, oh, is it sinful to think about sex? Because that's actually in the 8 stages of brahmachari, that's actually the first stage. If you think about sex, then you've lost, in some sense, brahmacharya, at least subtly. Regarding your question, is that also one form of illicit sex or against our 4 principles? And Prabhupada says, what do we think? Yeah, he says, yes, even thinking sex is the same as illicit sex. But then he gives, no, don't worry, he gives something. But one who is not advanced cannot avoid it. But that does not disturb our regular procedure. We should strongly follow all regulations and principles and chant, and these thoughts will come and go away. Thinking will come. Even great saintly persons like Lord Shiva are not free of thoughts that come. So what to speak of you? Like we shouldn't expect, if a thought comes into our mind, we can't really control that. That's due to our past samskaras and vasanas, to our past misdeeds and different things. And that's coming to our mind. It's not good. It's the same as illicit sex, but Prabhupada's giving us a pass because even Lord Shiva got afflicted by that. So what to speak of us? So Prabhupada gives this. So we must say that such thinking is not offensive because you're accustomed to this habit. But then he gives us further details. But beyond thinking are feeling and willing. So even thoughts of sex connection may come. That is difficult for even saintly persons to avoid. Still, in the further stages of feeling and willing, we can easily conquer over this sex urge. So how something happens, Jimmy, is that first you think about it. First comes contemplation. Then you start to feel like, Krishna says from contemplation of the senses, like greed and lust develop. And then from that, you can't actually get it fulfilled, and anger rises, and it all ends up in falling down from, higher consciousness. So if feeling and willing, then doing, that's the final one after feeling and willing. But in the stages of feeling willing, it's still easier to conquer. Willing should be avoided and acting stopped, or else there is offense of breaking this basic prohibition of illicit sex life. Because thinking comes, I shall give it practical shape, that is nonsense. Like if some thought comes and we keep meditating on it, that's improper. We don't have the ability to control what just pops into our mind at a random interval, but we do have the control to stop meditating on something or to cultivate meditation of it if it appears in our mind. Because thinking comes, I shall give it practical shape. That is nonsense. But because it is an old habit, we are unable to check it unless we can understand the nature of feeling, willing, and action, and how by proper use of intelligence we can prevent thoughts from maturing into actions. So a thought becomes a feeling, becomes you want to will to do it, and then it becomes an action. Like sometimes my Guru Maharaj, he's sitting in a wheelchair and he wants to get up. So he's waiting to get up. He's okay, thinking, feeling, willing, and doing, and then finally he gets up. And sometimes maybe when we're asleep in our beds, we also think something like that. All right, I gotta get up. Thinking, feeling, willing, and then you just finally get up. So how by proper use of intelligence we can prevent thoughts to mature into actions. This is the practical application of Krishna consciousness regular principles. Even Lord Chaitanya himself said that sometimes when I see a wooden form of a woman, my mind becomes agitated. But that does not mean we should give it a practical shape. That is intelligence. One must be convinced that sex life without exception means trouble. So it means, without exception means licit or illicit means trouble. Therefore, he is able to stop it at the thinking stage by not allowing it to be felt, much less willed or acted. So now Prabhupada is giving a hint of his own experiences with his disciples. I am so much disgusted by this troublesome business of marriage, because nearly every day I receive some complaint from husband or wife, and practically that is not my business as sannyasi to be marriage counselor. So henceforward, I'm not sanctioning any more marriages, and those who want to marry must know in advance and be prepared to make outside income to support wife and home, separate from the temple. And in the temple, husband and wife shall live separately. That must be, or what is the meaning of spiritual society like ours? I made a concession, but how can I encourage something which has proven so much trouble? So that's Prabhupada going through illicit sex and the process of our psychology working from thinking, feeling, and willing. And uncharacteristically, it's only 8:45 and I've run out of things to say. So if anyone else has anything to say, we can continue hearing. But I'd like to ask Chandrasekhar Maharaj to be the first one, if there's anything. So someone please grab him the wireless microphone.
Wow, I'm thinking what a wonderfully awkward subject, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, Prabhu Vishnu was telling me, I asked all these people and they all said no. I'm thinking, what? And I read the verse. I was like, oh, they probably read the verse instead of that.
No, but it's good, that sometimes things are awkward. There's nothing you can do about them. You still just have to continue with dealing with things, even though they may be awkward in this case. But this is a very important subject, the idea of contemplating, then that leads to actual acting. As we know from Bhagavad Gita, Jyayato Vishayam Pum Sam Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kama Krodo Vijayate Krodo Bhavati Samoha Samohat Smriti Vibramaha Smriti Brahmashad Buddhinasha Buddhinasha Pranashati. Contemplating the object of the senses, one develops attachment, lust develops lust, anger arises, anger, delusion arises from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and one falls down again into the material pool. So this is a sequence of items or events that happen one after one another. And if we can catch it at an earlier stage, it's much easier than trying to deal with it at a later stage. So as you were saying, that so many samskaras or impressions are there in the mind. And because these impressions are there, they bubble to the top, just like Prabhupada said sometimes, in a lake or a large body of water, something is kind of fermenting on the very bottom, and suddenly a bubble rises up to the top. So this is kind of the nature of the way our minds work. However, if we can conquer the mind by diverting everything back to Krishna, then the mind becomes our best friend instead of our worst enemy. We hear that also in Bhagavad Gita, that the mind is the best friend of the living entity and also his enemy as well. So controlling the mind is the key. And this is something that has to be constantly practiced, as Bhaktisiddhanta Swami used to say, that when one wakes up, one has to beat the mind 100 times with a broomstick, and then when going to sleep, one has to beat the mind 100 times with a broom. So this is the nature of the mind. The mind will constantly be regurgitating thoughts of various types of sense gratification. Of course, certainly sex life will be involved in that. So as the mind comes up with various unwanted thoughts, then we just let them go. It's kind of like if I've heard it talked about like if you were on the bank of a river and you were watching the water flow by and you watch something flow towards you and then you don't focus on it, you just let it float on by, and then something else comes towards you and you don't focus on it, and you just let it float on by. I think this is kind of what we're attempting to do for the most part when we're chanting japa. There's so many, where these samskaras are bubbling up like water at boiling, all these things are boiling up. We're thinking of things of the past. We're trying to make decisions. We are planning the future. We are regretting the past. We are nostalgically looking at something that happened a long time ago. And all these things are not what we're supposed to be doing during japa. So we're trying to gradually rise to that point where we can let those thoughts just kind of float on by. As we're chanting, we're just focusing on the sound vibration. We're letting the thoughts float on by. And if we can actually do that, at least to some percentage of the time while we're chanting japa, then we discover that in general, we're able to do that at other times during the day when things bubble forward and bubble up in our consciousness. We can just let them float on by. And then we realize how many times have something bubbled up, I thought of it, and then identified with it, and then wound up acting, as you say, thinking, feeling, and willing, when it had nothing to do with me at all. We are not these thoughts. We are not our past. We are not what our habits are or what people have, allowed us to be programmed with as a result of various interactions. We're not any of these things. So if we learn the art of simply trying to hear Krishna's name and letting things drift by, and similarly, when we let impulses, desires, and images of sex activity just drift on by, then we gradually become able to control the mind. And this is how we attempt to control the mind. And we should know, too, that the mind and the consciousness is kind of like the weather. Some days outside it's warm and sunny, it's easy to walk down the street. Other days there may be a storm going and it's hard to do anything. It's just a complete struggle, like a hurricane. So also, this is an important thing to understand, that it's not always going to be hurricane force winds. They may come at some times, but I think it was Victor Hugo in the Hunchback of Notre Dame said one time that extreme difficulty or extreme suffering or extreme emotions of both kinds, either positive or negative, like a torrent or a rainstorm can't endure long. They can only endure for a little while, and then they gradually phase out. So that we can also take heart in that if we're experiencing a particularly tumultuous day or morning or something like that, we can know that probably 12 hours later it'll be different, just like the weather. Things do change over the course of some hours because the modes of nature, like the weather, they come in, they do their thing, and as it says in Bhagavad Gita, sometimes the mode of goodness is prominent, and sometimes the mode of passion is prominent, and sometimes the mode of ignorance is prominent, defeating both goodness and passion. So there's always this competition for supremacy by the modes. And if we can let that go, then we could also okay, I got to hold on right now, and then this will be over in a little bit of time if I can just keep holding on. So that's a couple of things I would say. There's a very nice book that was written or compiled really by um, Danavir Swami called Brain Game,
Yeah.
where he discusses the whole, phenomenon of celibacy and how um, semen is produced by so many drops of other kinds of bodily fluids. So semen is kind of the highest thing. By the way, there's, as is explained in scriptures, there's a similar thing happening in female physiology too. It's not semen, but it's a similar thing. And it works exactly the same way. And so if one preserves rather than letting it flow out, then one's mental abilities, one's focus, a lot of things become much better. But again, it takes practice. And what's nice about that book is he lists case histories throughout history of both India and the Western world of people who were celibate, both men and women, who were celibate, and something about their lives. A very nice book to look at. So those are a few things I would mention. I've spoken too long.
And when Mara was just speaking, it reminded me of a couple of things, like the the mentality of what's happening in the mother and the father while begetting a child will certainly affect the mentality of the child. And we hear in the start of the Mahabharata how there was 3 queens that were said to have children, because one duty of the king is to have a successor. And so there was some issue that there was not going to be a successor, and so they had this emergency begetting of children. And so the first queen closed her eyes, and her son ended up being Dhritarashtra, born blind. And then the second one kept her eyes open, but she was completely pale. So her son was born very, very white, very light-skinned. And then the last one was, everything was normal, and the child was born, that was Vidura, born completely normal. And regarding I guess, yeah, that's what came to my mind. There's other things I've heard, but does anyone have any more comments or questions? Hadai Pran.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the class. I like this point about Garbhadan Samskar. I just wanted to get a clarification on it. So we see examples in the Shastra and in basic history that we have good parents, but who may have done the Garbhadan Samskar and may not have got the child that they expected. And we may have really bad parents. Let's take, for example, Hiranyakashipu, who wanted a demon child, but then got a devotee instead. So how much is the Garbhadan Samskar, like in psychology, we have this phenomenon of nature versus nurture. So I'd like to get your thoughts on the nature versus nurture aspect of the Garbhadan Samskar.
Well, it's all, it's a science. So there's details. If you know all the details, then you can pretty easily understand the outcome. So if they didn't expect, that doesn't mean that it was nature versus nurture. Also, this whole nature versus nurture, like in science, they say something's random or they say something's nature when they don't understand it. It was just random chance. No, it just means you don't understand the details behind what happened with it. And so, for like Hiranyakashipu, he just didn't know. He wanted a nice big demon child, but he didn't know that Narada Muni was the form of a bird that made him, like during conception, say one of the holy names of the Lord, and also teach his pregnant wife. So, like that, that. But from a scientific point of view, then it's obvious. Okay, if that influence is going on, then it's going to produce a saintly child. And similarly, if you read this Garbhadam Samskar, you can see all the different details of what nakshatra is there when there's this conception, what day, after the time period is it being conceived, what is the diet that the mother and the father have been eating. There's so many different things that if you know all these things, then it's very easy to understand what is going to be the outcome. And it's the only thing is sometimes you may not know. There may be daiva, some outside influence that we can't perceive, like Hiranyakashipu couldn't perceive Narada Muni. And also, it's we may not understand what exactly would the very like saintly son not look like or not look like. Actually, I'm reading this thing here. It's saying, if you wait till the 16th night, then you have a son who will love and help all living creatures. But if you have one on the 4th night, which is like very early, you'll have a son who will have a premature death. Or the 6th night, an average son. But as you keep waiting and waiting, it gets better and better. So ultimately, this thing happening in Bhagavatam was bound by karma. Krishna wanted his pastime of fighting with Jai and Vijay. So therefore, all these things happen, and sometimes, someone may they just look at someone, oh, I feel so much attracted to that person. But it's really, many demigods are like, okay, these two need to get together to produce these children to make these things happen. There's so many higher sources that are planning all these things. And so they can also have an influence in these that we won't perceive. And so it'll seem like, oh, where did that come from? What the heck? Prahlad coming from Hiranyakashipu. So yeah, now it's 9 o'clock, and so I'm going to fanatically stop the class. Hari Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. All glories to Prabhupada.
His Grace Natabara Gauranga Prabhu ki jai.